Welcome. Today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
My life has been so chaotic that I barely had time to breathe, let alone write about it. But now that things have finally settled, I can share my story and maybe ITLL help someone else avoid a similar situation. I'm a 38-year-old guy who was married to Laura, a 37-year-old woman, for what I thought would be forever. Turned out to be 7 years of my life I'll never get back. Our marriage wasn't terrible. At least that's what I kept telling myself. We met on Facebook and I honestly thought I'd hit the jackpot. She was beautiful, funny, and seemed perfect. Having grown up with a mom who was extremely abusive to my dad, I was extra cautious about spotting red flags. I remember the screaming matches at 2 a.m., plates flying across the room, and my dad just taking it all because he loved us and didn't want to leave. So with Laura, I was on high alert. I spent 2 years observing her every move, how she treated waitstaff, handled stress, dealt with money. Basically everything you're supposed to check before committing. She passed every test with flying colors. She was patient, kind, and generous. Everything my mom wasn't. I thought I'd finally broken the cycle of abuse in my family. I even remember telling my best friend, Josh, that I'd found a good woman. But wow, was I wrong. We had a beautiful wedding, bought a cozy house in the suburbs of Mapleview, and started what I thought would be our happily ever after. Little did I know, I was walking into a new kind of nightmare. Things started to fall apart about 3 years in, and it was a sharp decline from there. We went from being the couple everyone envied to having massive blowout fights almost every other week, usually over the smallest things. Dishes in the sink, me working late, her spending too much time with her friends, or even what TV shows to watch. I was trying so hard to hold our marriage together because I genuinely believed we could fix things. This was the woman who used to leave sweet notes in my lunchbox and surprise me with weekend trips. I couldn't understand how we'd gone from that to her screaming at me over buying the wrong brand of coffee. I'm the type of person who believes in fixing things rather than throwing them away, so I suggested couples therapy. Actually, I begged for it. I found a reputable therapist who specialized in marriage counseling, set up all the appointments, and even covered the $140 per session cost since Laura said, it was my idea, my expense. We went to exactly 1 session, and it was a complete disaster. The therapist gently pointed out some communication issues and suggested that Laura's way of handling conflict might be unhealthy. Laura lost it, started crying, claimed the therapist was attacking her, and refused to ever go back. She even called the therapist a quack and accused me of trying to make her look crazy. Later, I found out her dad had passed away shortly before our big fight started. I tried to be understanding. Grief affects people in strange ways, but Laura wouldn't talk about it or seek any help. Instead, she just grew angrier and more distant. Although she never got physical or broke things, her screaming could wake up the whole neighborhood. Our neighbors actually called the cops once because they thought someone was being attacked. It was just Laura yelling at me for forgetting her dry cleaning. Eventually, we settled into this strange routine where we were more like roommates who occasionally had sex than a real couple. Every day was the same: wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner in front of the TV, and go to bed. Rinse and repeat. The fights became less frequent, but only because we barely spoke anymore. I was still foolishly in love with her, though. Pathetic, right? I kept clinging to memories of the early days, convinced that if we just tried hard enough, we could get back to that happiness. I believed in our marriage vows that for better or worse meant sticking things out. I guess I forgot that forsaking all others was part of those vows too. But more on that later. Maybe I should have seen the warning signs, but I was raised to see marriage as sacred. Unless someone was being hit or cheated on, you stick it out and work on things. Well, it turns out one of those deal breakers was just around the corner, and I had no idea what was coming. I work a regular corporate job, not exactly glamorous. It's a mid-level position where I'm important enough to travel but not important enough to fly business class. My boss sent me to a business expo in Harborview, so I was supposed to be gone for 5 days mingling with clients and pretending to care about PowerPoint presentations. For days into the expo, there was a crisis back at the office. Servers crashed and we lost a bunch of client data, typical corporate emergency stuff. My boss called everyone back early, and since I'm a dedicated employee, or maybe just an idiot, I booked the first flight home. I had this romantic idea in my head, like in those movies where the husband surprises his wife and they have this magical reunion. I actually thought that would happen. During the ride back to Cedarwood Heights from the airport, I planned out the surprise. I stopped at a florist and spent $95 on her favorite pink peonies. Flowers she'd always said reminded her of our first date. I grabbed some wine and fancy chocolates, too, thinking maybe this could be our fresh start. We'd been so distant lately, just going through the motions, and I hoped this gesture would remind her why she fell in love with me. I got home around 3:30 p.m., feeling like the world's best husband with the flowers and chocolates in hand. Everything looked normal. Her car was in the driveway, which made sense since she worked from home on Fridays. But then I noticed a few strange things. Her favorite playlist was blasting from upstairs, something she only did when she was in a really good mood. There were 2 wine glasses in the sink, but I figured she'd had a friend over for lunch or something. God, I was so naive. I walked upstairs, excited to surprise her. As the music got louder, I started hearing other noises, but my brain just wasn't connecting the dots. It was like that moment in a horror movie where everyone's yelling at the character not to open the door. I was that character. I turned the doorknob, pushed open the door to our bedroom, and my entire world imploded. Every happy memory, every moment of trust, every I love you, all of it turned to ash in a single second. There she was, Laura, my wife. The woman I'd spent 7 years loving, supporting, and building a life with. And she was beneath some random guy in our bed. The same bed where we talked about having kids one day. The same bed where I'd held her as she cried over her dad's death. She wasn't even trying to be quiet about it, going at it like I didn't even exist, like our marriage was meaningless. The flowers I'd bought slipped from my hand, falling to the floor. I just stood there, frozen in shock, watching them scramble like cockroaches under a light. The guy had the nerve to try and run past me like I was nothing more than a door he could slip through. He was struggling to get dressed, fumbling and dropping things in his hurry. And something in me snapped. Maybe it was seeing him there, or maybe it was just the sheer disrespect. But before I knew it, my hand was around his throat. Not to hurt him, just to stop him from walking away so easily. I slapped him twice, open-handed, like I was in some dramatic soap opera. I still don't know why I didn't just punch him. The guy's expression shifted from fear to anger, like he actually thought he could fight me in my own home after I caught him with my wife. The audacity was unreal. He probably didn't even know Laura was married. I'm sure she fed him some story about being single or separated. He likely thought I was a crazy ex or something. I let him go before it escalated. Not because I was scared, but because I realized he wasn't worth it. He didn't make vows to me. He wasn't the one who promised to love and cherish me till death do us part. He was just another guy who couldn't keep it in his pants. The real betrayal was still in that bedroom, looking at me like I'd ruined her day. Laura was standing there, fumbling with her bra like this was some minor inconvenience. The peonies I'd bought were scattered on the floor, probably crushed under his feet as he left. I watched her as she fixed herself up in the mirror, the same mirror I'd hung for her last Christmas because she said it had better lighting. She didn't even glance at me. She took her time smoothing down her hair, avoiding my eyes, acting like she hadn't just destroyed everything we'd built. When she finally did look at me, she didn't apologize, didn't try to explain, didn't say anything with a shred of decency. Instead, she looked annoyed, like I was some door-to-door salesman who had interrupted her day, and said, "Why are you even back?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I can explain." Nothing even remotely close to an apology. Just irritation that I had the audacity to come home early and catch her cheating in our bed, in our house where I paid most of the mortgage. My hands were actually twitching, remembering how good it felt to slap her affair partner. But I just stood there, paralyzed, as she muttered under her breath, "You weren't supposed to be back." It was like she thought I was the one at fault for coming home early, as if I'd done something wrong by surprising her. Like I was supposed to call ahead and schedule a convenient time to catch her cheating. The absolute audacity. 7 years of marriage, and this was all it meant to her. A minor inconvenience in her afternoon. You know what really messed me up? Our wedding photo was sitting right there on the nightstand while all of this was happening. The same nightstand where she placed the breakfast I made for her just last weekend. The same room where, for the past 6 months, she'd been telling me she was too tired for sex. Meanwhile, she clearly had plenty of energy for this random guy. I stood there like an idiot, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? Every late night at work she mentioned. Every girls' night out. Every visit to her mom. How many of those were lies? And then, as if to put a nail in the coffin, Laura wasn't done talking. She completely lost it, screaming at me as if I was the one who had just blown up our marriage. "You weren't supposed to be back," she shrieked. her face turning red and blotchy like it did during our worst fights. "This is your fault. If you just told me you were coming home, you would never have seen this." The mental gymnastics she was pulling could have won an Olympic gold. She was actually trying to blame me for catching her cheating. And then she threw out the kicker. "I asked you for an open relationship, and you said no," she yelled. Like that somehow made what she did okay. Yeah, she had drunkenly brought it up once, months ago. I said no because I believed in monogamy. In her twisted mind, that apparently meant she could just go ahead and do it anyway. "I have needs," she yelled, as if I were a monster for expecting loyalty from my own wife. She actually had the nerve to say, "I tried to do things without hurting you." The insanity of that statement. She was trying to cheat on me nicely. Something in me snapped. 7 years of love, trust, and dedication were reduced to "I have needs." Every kiss, every "I love you," every moment we shared, it was all fake. I crossed the room in 3 steps, my hands shaking with rage, and grabbed her by the collar of the shirt I'd bought her for her birthday last month. I raised my fist, wanting to hurt her as much as she'd hurt me, to make her feel something close to the pain tearing through my chest. But then I saw the fear in her eyes, real, genuine fear. Even though she had just shattered everything I believed in, even though our entire marriage had been a lie, I couldn't do it. I wasn't that guy. I refused to be that guy. My mom used to look at my dad with that same fear, and I swore I'd never put that look on anyone's face. So I let go of her shirt and stepped back, my fists still clenched but lowered. There's a dark part of me that still wishes I'd given in, just to make her feel a fraction of my pain, but I'm glad I didn't. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I deserved better than becoming the man I'd always feared. There I was, standing in my own bedroom, surrounded by crushed pink peonies, staring at this stranger who wore my wife's face. 7 years of marriage, and it had come to this, her blaming me for catching her cheating. The woman who used to kiss me goodbye every morning was now telling me it was somehow my fault for not calling ahead to discover her affair. As soon as I let go of her shirt, her demeanor shifted faster than flipping a TV channel. The fear disappeared, and suddenly she became the victim. "You were going to hit me, really?" she yelled as I walked away, adding, "This is exactly why I don't love you anymore. You're not even a real man." She kept going, hurling every insult she could think of, trying to provoke me into being the bad guy in her story. She'd gone from looking scared to screaming accusations, as though that would justify her actions. It wasn't until I talked to my buddy Jake later that night that it hit me she wanted me to hit her. She was baiting me, trying to get a reaction she could use against me, to turn herself from the cheating wife into the abused spouse. She probably had it all planned out. She'd run to the cops, play the victim, and walk away with half my stuff and monthly alimony checks. The same woman who used to bring me soup when I was sick was now trying to set me up for domestic violence. I had to get out of that house. The whole place reeked of betrayal, and I mean that literally. Their perfumes and colognes were mixed together in our bedroom, on our sheets, in the air. The same bed where I'd comforted her through anxiety attacks was now tainted with another man's scent. I grabbed my wallet and keys and just drove, ending up at my friend Jake's place. Thank God for Jake. He took one look at my face and broke out the whiskey. He'd been divorced before, so he knew exactly what I was facing. He laid it out for me straight. I needed to get a lawyer ASAP. But here's the kicker, I was making around $110,000 a year, while Laura worked part-time at a boutique, barely playing at a career. In our state, that meant I'd likely be looking at paying her alimony. The same woman who had another man in our bed might get to drain my bank account every month. But Jake, smart guy that he is, pointed out that her infidelity could affect the alimony. "Document everything," he told me. "Every text, email, receipt. Anything that proves she was stepping out." Finally, some good news in this mess. Maybe I wouldn't have to bankroll her affair after all. Even so, my head was spinning. Just that morning, I'd been a happily married man planning a surprise for my wife. Now I was sitting in my friend's living room, Googling divorce lawyers and trying not to throw up every time I remembered what I'd walked in on. There was absolutely no way I was going to try and fix things with her. I might be dumb enough to buy expensive flowers for a cheating wife, but I'm not stupid enough to forgive one. While I was at Jake's place trying to process everything, my phone started blowing up. Apparently, since Laura couldn't manipulate me in person, she decided to try breaking me down through text instead. And wow, you wouldn't believe the stuff she sent. This was the same woman who'd been sending me cute little heart emojis just a week ago. Now she was firing off messages comparing me to her affair partner in explicit detail, trashing my performance and praising his. She even went as far as listing measurements and providing her own performance reviews like she was rating me on Yelp. The audacity was unreal. She told me her new guy had ruined her for other men. As if I'd ever want her back after catching her in our bed. But here's the kicker. She was furious at me for interrupting her affair. She called me selfish for coming home early and said I'd ruined her chance at real happiness. The mental gymnastics she was pulling could have won an Olympic medal. Thank God Jake was there, because he immediately told me to screenshot everything. Document, 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 he kept saying. And man, was he right. Not even a minute after she sent her rant comparing me to her affair partner, I watched those messages start disappearing one by one. Guess she realized confessing to adultery in writing wasn't the smartest move, considering I made 3 times her salary and divorce was on the horizon. After deleting all the evidence, she switched gears and just insulted me, careful not to mention her afternoon activities again. Watching those messages disappear in real time was like watching someone try to wipe up a crime scene. Too bad for her, I had screenshots of everything. Jake turned out to be a gold mine of divorce advice. Between shots of whiskey, he walked me through everything. Securing my bank accounts, saving the evidence, you name it. I barely slept that night, replaying everything while scrolling through divorce lawyer reviews. The next 2 weeks were a blur of consultations with attorneys. Some wanted retainers that cost more than my car. Others didn't inspire much confidence. But I finally found this guy, David, who actually seemed to care about my case and didn't require me to sell a kidney to afford him. When I showed David the screenshots of Laura's text meltdown and the photos of our bedroom in shambles, he actually smiled. He said we had a strong case to minimize or even eliminate alimony. Still, he was realistic, reminding me that judges in our state often favored the lower-earning spouse, no matter why the marriage ended. But he promised to fight tooth and nail for me. Just having someone in my corner, someone who knew what they were doing, felt like the first good thing since this nightmare began. Then came the fun part, serving Laura with divorce papers. She dodged the server for nearly 3 weeks, changing her schedule, pretending not to be home, even having her mom tell the server she'd moved to Arizona. They finally caught her coming out of a Pilates class, probably the only actual exercise she'd done in months. Even then, she took the full 30 days to respond, just out of spite. She knew exactly what she was doing, dragging things out as long as possible, knowing I was paying David by the hour. Once the proceedings began, Laura transformed into the Queen of Petty. She forgot essential documents, showed up late, claimed she couldn't find bank statements I knew she had, and demanded detailed inventories of everything in the house, down to the last spoon. Her lawyer kept sending ridiculous settlement proposals. She wanted the house, my 401k, and alimony on top of that. The nerve of this woman, caught cheating and demanding half my retirement savings. The worst part? She was still seeing her affair partner, living her best life and trying to make mine miserable. Every time we got close to an agreement, Laura changed her mind or added new demands, almost as if she enjoyed watching me bleed money on legal fees. Meanwhile, I tried to move on, telling myself I could get back into the dating scene. Not my finest hour. I went through a phase of random hookups on apps like Hinge and Bumble, thinking that was what moving on looked like. But each empty morning after just reminded me why I'd said no to an open relationship in the first place. Casual sex wasn't my style. I wanted real connection, someone to wake up to and share inside jokes with. This lifestyle just made me feel hollow. Needing something different to clear my mind, I thought about what I used to enjoy before everything with Laura started. Before the endless 60-hour workweeks and constant fights, I'd been a huge reader, the kind who'd stay up all night just to finish a book. So one Saturday, instead of scrolling dating apps or checking emails from my lawyer, I decided to visit this little indie bookstore downtown. You know, the kind, creaky wooden floors, that amazing old book smell, cats lounging in the windows. I found myself in the sci-fi section, completely lost. It was like the whole genre had evolved while I was busy trying to save my marriage. I was staring at the shelves with this dumbfounded look, trying to figure out where to even start, when I heard a soft laugh beside me. Not mocking, just amused. She was holding this massive book that looked like it could double as a weapon, and when I turned to look at her, she just smiled and asked if I needed help. I told her I was trying to get back into sci-fi but had no idea where to start. Next thing I knew, we were sitting in these cozy chairs in the corner, and she was giving me a crash course in modern science fiction. Her eyes lit up as she talked about her favorite books, and she had this adorable habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she got excited about a particular series. What started as a simple book recommendation turned into a 2-hour conversation covering everything from classic Asimov to contemporary space operas. She told me about a series she loved on parallel universes, and I shared stories about my old favorites from college. For those 2 hours, I completely forgot about Laura and all the chaos in my life. I was just a guy talking about books with a beautiful woman who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. After our impromptu book club session, I finally worked up the courage to ask for her number. My hands were actually shaking as I put it into my phone. Pretty ridiculous for a 38-year-old, but something about her made me feel like a teenager again. I walked out of that bookstore with her number, a recommendation for The Three-Body Problem, and my first genuine smile in months. That night, I found myself rereading our conversation, amazed by how different it felt compared to those hollow dating app messages. There was something real there. On our first actual date, I knew I had to be honest about my ongoing divorce. I'd rehearsed it in my head, expecting her to bolt at the mention of my soon-to-be ex. But Amelia, yeah, that's her name, just took a sip of her wine and said, "I appreciate your honesty. We all have baggage, and at least you're dealing with yours. No judgment, no awkward silence, just calm acceptance." She even joked that dating a guy going through a divorce meant she'd never have to wonder if he was secretly married. Amelia was everything Laura wasn't. Where Laura would scream and argue, Amelia was calm and open. Where Laura demanded attention, Amelia gave it freely. She was genuinely interested in my work, remembered little things I'd mentioned weeks before, and never once made me feel bad about the mess with my divorce. For the first time in years, I felt seen and heard. The best part? I wasn't even looking for her. No dating apps, no setups, just two people connecting over sci-fi in a bookstore. You can't make this stuff up. 5 months into dating Amelia, I was falling hard. Everything felt right with her, the way she'd send book recommendations to me at work, leave little notes in books she lent me, and actually listen when I talked about my day. But Laura was still dragging out the divorce, throwing up new roadblocks every time I thought we were close to finalizing it. Missing signatures, disputed assets, suddenly remembered joint accounts. If there was a way to delay things, she'd try it. Through it all, Amelia was incredibly patient. She never pressured me about the divorce or complained about being with a technically married man. She just held my hand through the frustrating calls with my lawyer, David, and reminded me that this too would pass. For the first time in a long time, I was genuinely happy. Not just pretending to be okay, but really, truly happy. Everything went completely off the rails just when things were starting to feel right with Amelia. We just spent a perfect Saturday together. Lunch at a cozy little cafe, some shopping, and we were heading back to her car in the mall parking lot as the sun set. We were laughing, talking about what movie to watch that night, when suddenly everything exploded into chaos. I heard it before I saw it. A car engine roaring like someone had floored the gas pedal. I turned toward the sound just in time to see a car hurtling straight at us. It wasn't random. It was aimed directly at Amelia. Instinct kicked in, and I grabbed her arm to pull her out of the way, but I wasn't fast enough. The car clipped her leg, and I watched in horror as it snapped. The sound of her bone breaking, mingled with her scream, is something I'll never forget. She collapsed onto the pavement, and I went down with her, trying to shield her with my body as I fumbled for my phone to call 911. I heard tires screeching again. The car had crashed into another vehicle but was now reversing, revving like it was getting ready for another pass. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. The driver was trying to hit us again. Amelia was sobbing in pain, her leg bent at a terrible angle, and I knew that if I didn't move us, we'd both be dead. I grabbed her under the arms, dragging her between two parked cars, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. She cried out with every movement, but I had no choice. I had to keep going. The car charged forward again, crashing into the vehicles we'd been hiding between, the impact setting off every car alarm around. By now, people were running over, phones out, screaming. The entire parking lot was chaos. Alarms blaring, people shouting, and Amelia crying in pain beside me. And then the driver's door opened, and I felt time stop. Out stepped Laura. It was as if she was arriving for a casual dinner party, completely composed, like she hadn't just tried to kill two people in broad daylight. She looked exactly as she had the last time I'd seen her at the lawyer's office, down to the same jacket and perfectly styled hair. But there was something new in her expression, a wild, unhinged look in her eyes. It was terrifying. The total disconnect between her appearance and what she'd just done made my blood run cold. This wasn't a random incident or a drunk driver. This was my soon-to-be ex-wife, who had apparently been stalking us and decided that if she couldn't have me, she'd rather see me dead. And she hadn't just tried to kill me. She had specifically aimed for Amelia, an innocent woman whose only crime was making me happy. Holding Amelia close, trying to keep her calm, I watched Laura approach, horrified that she might have a weapon or might try to finish what she'd started. Seeing her step out of that car was like watching someone transform into a monster before my eyes. This wasn't the woman I'd been married to for 7 years. It wasn't even the person I'd caught cheating. This was something else entirely, a rage-filled creature wearing my ex-wife's face. It was a chilling realization Laura had actually tried to murder us. And not in a moment of heated anger, but in a premeditated, calculated way. She must have followed us, waited for the perfect moment, and then tried to run us down in broad daylight. As she walked toward us, her heels clicking on the pavement like some twisted countdown, I genuinely thought she was going to try to finish the job. Her face was blank, but her eyes burned with an intense, cold hatred I'd never seen before. Not even in our worst fights. Thank God, before Laura could reach us, a bystander, a guy built like a linebacker, stepped in and grabbed her, holding her back even as she struggled against him like a rabid animal straining at a leash. I was holding Amelia, trying to keep her calm and assess her injuries, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from Laura. This was the same woman I'd sat across from at countless dinners, the person I'd slept next to for 7 years, the one I'd once planned to have kids with. And now she had just tried to kill me and my girlfriend in a shopping mall parking lot. The shock of it, the total disconnect between the Laura I'd known and the one standing before me, made my head spin. How do you even begin to process that someone you once loved enough to marry has just tried to murder you? Soon, sirens blared in the distance, and within moments, the parking lot was swarming with police and paramedics. As officers moved in to arrest Laura, her demeanor shifted once again. She went from rabidly struggling against the bystander to playing the victim. Tears streamed down her face, and she started yelling, "He's lying. This isn't what it looks like." It was surreal, her ability to flip between rage and manipulation like a switch. Meanwhile, paramedics were tending to Amelia, who was lying on a stretcher. Her leg was in bad shape, and I could see the pain etched across her face. Despite everything, she tried to give me a reassuring smile, as if to say, "I'll be okay." The guilt was crushing. Amelia didn't deserve any of this. She'd been nothing but kind and supportive, and now she was the victim of my ex-wife's unhinged jealousy. Laura, on the other hand, was losing what little grip on reality she had left. As the officers handcuffed her, she started screaming at me across the parking lot. "You're ruining my life, Kyle," she shrieked, as though I was the one who had just tried to commit vehicular homicide. "It hasn't even been a year, and you're already parading around with that slut." The venom in her voice was so intense that even the officers looked uncomfortable. Here was a woman who had cheated on me in our bed, dragged out the divorce proceedings to make my life miserable, and now attempted to kill me and my girlfriend. And yet, somehow, in her twisted mind, she was the victim. The mental gymnastics were exhausting. The police took Laura away, her screams fading as the patrol car drove off. I turned my attention back to Amelia, who was being loaded into the ambulance. I climbed in with her, holding her hand as she gritted her teeth through the pain. The paramedics reassured me that she'd recover, but seeing her like that broke something inside me. This wasn't just about Laura's jealousy anymore. She had escalated to attempted murder, and I knew we were in for a long battle. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of hospital visits, legal consultations, and police interviews. Amelia underwent surgery to repair her leg, which had been broken in 2 places. The doctors were optimistic about her recovery, but it would take months of physical therapy before she could walk normally again. Despite everything, Amelia remained her usual upbeat self. She even joked, "At least I've got a great story for icebreakers now." Meanwhile, the district attorney's office wasted no time building a case against Laura. Multiple security cameras in the parking lot had captured the entire incident from several angles. The footage was damning. You could see Laura's car circling the lot like a shark, waiting for the perfect moment. She parked for a while, watching us, before gunning the engine and aiming directly for Amelia. The DA said the footage was critical because it proved premeditation. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, deliberate, and cold-blooded. Watching the footage during one of my meetings with the prosecutors felt like reliving a nightmare. Seeing Laura's face behind the wheel, the calm way she adjusted her rearview mirror before accelerating. It was chilling. This was the same woman I'd once trusted with my life, now captured on video trying to take it. When the trial finally began, it was like watching a twisted courtroom drama. The prosecutors laid out a mountain of evidence: the security footage, eyewitness testimonies, and even Laura's phone records, which showed she'd been tracking my location through a shared app we'd forgotten to deactivate after our separation. Witness after witness described how Laura had driven through the parking lot like a maniac, clearly aiming for us. Amelia's testimony was the hardest to hear. She recounted the terror of seeing the car coming at her, the excruciating pain of her leg breaking, and the sheer horror of realizing Laura was coming back for another pass. Despite her calm demeanor on the stand, I could see the trauma in her eyes. It broke my heart. Laura's defense was weak at best. Her lawyer tried to argue that she lost control in a moment of emotional distress, but the jury wasn't buying it. The premeditation was undeniable. She had stalked us, waited for the right moment, and made multiple attempts to harm us. The verdict was unanimous guilty on all counts: attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and reckless endangerment. When the sentencing came, I hoped for closure, but the judge handed down a sentence of just 12 years. 12 years for premeditated attempted murder. Couldn't believe it. With good behavior, Laura could be out in less than a decade. The prosecutors tried to explain the reasoning: no prior criminal record, remorse shown during the trial, even though it was obviously fake, and her being a first-time offender. None of it made sense to me. Laura had tried to kill 2 people in cold blood. How was 12 years enough? Still, there was one silver lining: the divorce proceedings, which had been on hold during the criminal trial, were suddenly a breeze. Laura had to attend via video link from prison, and the judge wasn't feeling generous toward her. Her lawyer tried to argue for alimony and a share of my assets, but the judge shut it down immediately. The court isn't in the business of rewarding attempted murderers with alimony, he said. It was the one time I felt like the justice system worked in my favor. Laura walked away with nothing: no alimony, no share of my 401k, not even the house. She got exactly what she deserved: a prison sentence and divorce papers that left her with nothing but her personal belongings. Amelia and I eventually moved in together, leaving the house I'd shared with Laura behind. We found a beautiful apartment closer to the city, with no ghosts of the past to haunt us. Amelia has fully recovered now. You can barely tell she ever broke her leg. She jokes that getting hit by a car was totally worth it because it meant getting rid of my crazy ex for good. Dark humor, sure, but it helps us cope. Sometimes I wonder if I could have avoided all this. Maybe I should have seen the red flags earlier or been more cautious when Laura first started acting distant. But hindsight is 20/20. Crazy doesn't always wave a red flag. Sometimes it hides behind a beautiful smile and whispered, "I love you," until one day, it tries to run you down in a parking lot. Now I'm genuinely happy. Amelia and I are planning our wedding for next spring, a fitting time to start a new chapter. Laura will eventually get out of prison, but we've taken precautions: restraining orders and even concealed carry permits just in case. Amelia's dad, a retired military officer, insisted on it. For anyone dealing with divorce or a toxic ex, document everything, protect yourself, and never underestimate the lengths someone might go when they lose control. And if you're lucky enough to find someone like Amelia, hold on to them tight. They're worth fighting for. What a wild story. How would you have handled Kyle's situation? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more crazy tales. See you next time.